When I was in college, I took an engineering course for non-engineering majors. It was a pretty interesting course, except that the professor kept assuming that we knew a lot of things already that we not only didn't know, but we never knew existed. And on the blackboard, he would draw clouds of mathematical equations, assuming, among other things, that we knew calculus, which we didn't, assuming that we understood algebra and trigonometry and all that sort of thing. And we had no idea what was going on in the class. All we knew that it was kind of interesting. And he was very astonished to find out that this was something of a problem for us. But this kind of instructional error is pretty common where instructors don't have any idea of what has to be learned first before something else can be productively practiced. The simple fact is that some things have to be learned before other things are learned. For example, you have to know how to add and subtract before you can practice long division. You can't practice troubleshooting unless you know how to recognize symptoms of malfunction. And you can't practice writing a novel until you know a little something about how words go together to make a sentence. But there's another side to this coin, and it's this. We often teach skills that can be learned in any order. For example, managers have to know how to read balance sheets, they have to know how to interview applicants, and prepare meeting agendas. Now, while all of these are important skills in the manager's toolbox, it doesn't make any difference which order they're learned in. They are all independent of one another and, to repeat myself, can be learned in any order. Now, how can you sequence your instructional unit productively so that people will be prepared for every instructional unit that they encounter? Big surprise, the answer is by drawing a skill hierarchy that shows the relationships between the skills that your people are expected to learn. Before showing you how it's done, though, we need to sort out just a little bit of terminology, because there are some word jumbles in this field that you need to learn to be comfortable with. For example, sub-skills, which is what we're talking about here, are called by a variety of names. They're called subordinate skills, prerequisite skills, enabling skills, sub-skills, and they all mean the same thing. It doesn't make any difference. There's no significant difference between those terms. So pick one and be comfortable. Well, whatever you call your subordinate skills, it's important that trainees learn those before they're allowed to tackle a higher level skill. This may seem pretty obvious to you, but it's not obvious to a whole lot of instructors. In our public school system, for example, very often students are passed from one grade to another even though they're not prepared. And then each year they become a little bit less prepared, and pretty soon they are so confused about what's going on that there's a strong urge to drop out. Well, now let's get on with drafting a hierarchy. There are two ways to derive a skill hierarchy. In this module, you will practice what we call the top-down method, and in module DO, you will practice the other one that starts with task analysis. We're going to use ventriloquism as the topic for this example. It ought to be politically neutral and gender neutral and all kinds of neutral, so as not to give us any problems. Now, here is the terminal objective. It says here, given a puppet and a skit, be able to perform the skit so that an audience is convinced the puppet is alive. That's it. So we'll put it at the top here of our as yet non-existent hierarchy. Next question then, before you can practice that, what kinds of skills would you have to have? Well, let me show you what the skills are. Here they are. First off, you need to be able to make a voice that's slightly different than your own. You need to be able to react to what the puppet says and does convincingly. You need to be able to speak without moving your lips. You need to have some lip control. You need to be able to manipulate the figure. That means you need to make the figure move as though he or she or it is alive. Never it, it's always he or she. And finally, you need to be able to read, because in order to read the skit, you need to be able to read the language. Now, before we try to put this into a hierarchy, let me get a friend of mine here for a couple of seconds just to show you a little bit of what this terminal performance looks like when you see it. Okay, now this is my friend Clyde.
Wait a minute.
What?
Who the heck you talking to?
I'm talking to this person right over there.
I think you're beginning to lose it.
Oh, you're always trying to embarrass me.
No. You're doing okay all by yourself.
I don't get any respect. Well, as I said, in order to practice this terminal objective, in addition to being a little bit weird, the skills you need are these. Now let's put the hierarchy together. How you do that is you take any two skills at random and ask yourself whether you could learn one without knowing anything about the other. For example, could we practice manipulating a puppet without knowing how to read? Of course we could. Could we learn how to read without knowing anything about moving puppets? Well, sure. That means that these skills are going to be parallel, which means we'll set them side by side on the hierarchy, and putting them side by side means that they can be learned in any order. Now let's take another one. What about lip control? Could we practice lip control without knowing anything about manipulating the figure? Sure we could. What about practicing lip control without knowing anything about how to read? Again, sure, we could do that. Therefore, we have another parallel skill, which we'll just put there. So we've got three skills, all of which are important to the terminal skill, but which could be learned and practiced in any order. Now let's take can react. Now this is where the ventriloquist reacts to whatever the puppet is doing while the puppet is saying a line or after the puppet says a line. Could we practice reacting without knowing how to read or knowing how to manipulate or without practicing lip control? Sure. So let's put that there as another parallel skill. Finally, can we practice making voices?
You know, can we practice making funny voices without knowing how to read or reacting or lip control or
manipulating the figure? Again, we could do this without knowing any of these other skills and vice versa. So in this case, the hierarchy looks like this. And then all you have to do once you're finished is to draw your lines, and you'll see some in the module that will give you some clues as to how to do that. And your hierarchy is finished. Now, in this case, the hierarchy is pretty simple. It just has those sub-skills. In other instances, the hierarchy will have more sub-skills and more levels. But bigger is not necessarily better. So try not to distort reality just to have a great big piece of paper filled with skills. Now, once you've drawn the hierarchy, be sure that all of the items are skills rather than subject matter. You need to be able to put the word can in front of whatever you've written. If you've written the word algebra, for example, can algebra doesn't make any sense. So algebra is not a skill. Can solve problems would describe a skill. Secondly, this hierarchy business is not about sequence of steps in the performing of a task. That's where the task analysis is all about. That's where the sequence of steps. What we're dealing with here is the relationship between sub-skills in terms of their dependency or their prerequisite relationship. Must we learn this before we can practice that? It says nothing at all about how the task is performed and when the steps in the task are performed. Okay, now it's your turn, and here's what you want to do. First off, write a well-stated objective and put it on the top of your hierarchy. If you didn't bring something, use a hobby. Then list the subordinate skills. Ask yourself, what would somebody have to be able to do before they could practice this terminal skill? Then construct the hierarchy. Take a pair of skills and ask yourself the magic question, could these be learned in any order, or must one be in place before the other one is practiced? Then add any missing skills, because as you finish your hierarchy, you go through each of these subordinate skills and ask yourself whether there's something that somebody has to be able to do before they can practice this or this. And if so, then you add those skills underneath. Finally, draw the lines and then test it for accuracy. Describe it to somebody, show it to somebody, and make any changes that are necessary. Now, when you're done, your hierarchy may be as simple as this one, or, as I said before, you may have several levels. But one thing for certain, a hierarchy tends to go this way rather than this way. If your hierarchy looks vertical, that means you've got some task analysis mixed in with it, which needs to be purged. Generally, what we teach is important, but the skills tend to be independent of one another. Okay, your turn to practice. This is a tool well worth having, and so you want to practice until you're confident that you can do it without supervision when you get home next week.